A very small piece of technology has turned this entire car into an absolute brick. You're not going anywhere. Let's get started. We've seen this recently in a video where we had a Bentley Continental GT Speed in the shop. They had the same situation. A very small piece of technology inside the steering column failed, and it completely locked up the entire car. It locked up the parking brake, it locks the steering wheel, it won't let you start the car. You're not going anywhere. The same situation has happened on this one. This is a 2009 Mercedes C300. And it's in decent shape. Actually, a local dealer has this vehicle, and they were getting ready to put it on the lot, and the steering wheel locked up, and it completely bricked the car. And they were like, what happened? I'll get Grimes over here, and he knows what happened, and he's been through this many, many times on these models. So you've worked on a lot of Mercedes in your day.
A few of them, yeah.
Tons. And a great deal of them is this exact problem.
I have, I've actually experienced this quite a few times on the 204, the W204 and the X204, which is the GLK, same platform, same engine, all of that. It's really common for the steering lock motors to fail.
So you've actually seen several of these coming on the tow truck. They talk about the steering wheel's locked, and you knew right away, boom, I know what's wrong. I've been through this. This is not my first rodeo.
Yep.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the steering lock is part of the immobilizer system, just like with the Bentley. So when that fails, you get nothing. You get, no power, engine won't start, steering wheel won't unlock, any of that.
So really, for all intents and purposes, it actually thinks it's probably being broken into.
Yep. Yeah, it's missing. It's got an error in the steering column lock module, and it shuts down the entire immobilizer. So it actually won't allow it to start or do anything.
Well, actually, on the Bentley, Grimes fixed that one too. It's the same scenario, not the same exact parts, but it's the same technology. We actually got the okay from the customer to do a little bypass with a little module on that, because Bentley doesn't sell just the steering lock motor. They sell the entire column with the motors and everything. It was like $6,000. The customer was like, just bypass it, I'm tired of this. And it's not like some little motor that it's like 30 minutes, you can get to it, swap it out, or fix it or something. It's a huge job. Let's head on into the interior, and Grimes can talk us through all that he had to go through to even get to this thing. You were telling me earlier that sometimes these can fail where the steering wheel is unlocked, it just won't start.
Yep, sometimes we get lucky. So when these do fail, they hard fail. Sometimes they'll start out a little sluggish, but once they fail, they're done. About 50% of the time, you'll get it to where it fails in the open position and the motor won't move, and you unplug the steering column lock if you're going to bypass it, do the emulator like you mentioned, and then carry on. You don't have to do a ton of disassembly. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case here.
Have you seen them a lot of times be in the lock position? Or you said it's 50%.
Yeah, it's about a 50% chance.
Unfortunately, this was the 50% portion that was locked up, and all of this had to come apart to even get the column out. So what do we see here, Grimes? We see, what is that, a knee bolster or something?
So yeah, on these you've got to pull all the plastics out from underneath of the dash. Funny enough, the accelerator pedal, because the steering column will not come out without pulling the accelerator pedal. Steering wheel, you have to pull your multifunction switch. The steering column module has the lock spring, everything in it. Accelerator pedal sitting there in the seat. Had to take it out for the clearance to get that steering column out. And all of that just to get that column out and to remove the ignition switch. So in order to program the new module, you have to pull the ignition switch and pair them together.
Okay. All this stuff had to come out to get just the column out, which allows us to get to the one little piece of technology, a little motor, that caused this whole problem. Let's head on over to our cart where we have the column laying on it. So this is the column that had to come out. You had to take all those pieces and parts apart just to get this out. And this isn't even the problem. It's one little piece that's on here.
Yep. So yeah, and the hits kept coming because this is an electric adjustable column, which, so it's got the 2 motors here, and with the car dead, you can't move the column in any position. You just kind of got to work with it where it's at.
Wow.
And that kind of throws a wrench in the works, especially if it's adjusted completely out. It's a bear to get out of there. But what actually fails is this module right here. And this is the steering column lock, and it's, you know, it's a theft prevention thing. And it's a pretty simple module. It's got a little motor inside of here and a chip, and it's only got 4 pins. And, you know, 2 of them are power and ground, and then 2 of them are signal. So basically it's just a single wire signal that talks to the ignition switch. The ignition switch says everything's okay. It says go ahead and start the car and unlock the steering wheel. And when there's a fault in these modules, it won't let you do anything.
Wow. So basically what you're saying is, as part of the process, when you go turn on the key to start the car, there's several things that are checked called the drive authorization to even allow you to even start your car. And one of those things that's part of this entire check is this guy right here.
Yep.
So when it fails, it says, oh, I'm bad, this isn't going to work. So then the rest of the systems in the car say, oh, well, then we're just going to shut it down. We're done.
And because it's locked, unfortunately, now we have to also cut this little stud out in order to remove the steering lock because it's stuck in there.
So the fix to just replace this little guy can be $1,500 bucks.
Yep.
But just like we did on the Bentley, there's an emulator out there. And how does that work? What does that do?
So essentially it's just, it's the same module but without the motor to lock the steering wheel.
Okay.
So it, you know, works with the drive authorization system exactly the same. The only difference is it won't lock the steering wheel, which, you know, there's a million other things in the theft prevention system. It's kind of just kind of an extra thing.
Right.
So
it basically lies to the system and says, oh yes, everything's fine, you know, everything's good. And like he mentioned, it doesn't have the motor inside of it anymore, so it will allow the car to drive again. You'll be able to use your car again, but the feature of locking your steering wheel, that will be gone, correct?
Yep. And honestly, there's a ton of Mercedes models that don't even have it.
Right, they came from the factory.
They don't have a steering lock.
Right.
Yeah, it's not part of the immobilizer system.
So it's really not that big of a deal.
No.
And to do that, with all the tear down and everything, it could be literally half the cost to take care of it with the emulator. Most people you probably have done emulators for, or?
Yeah, I'd say about 90% of customers that have this issue, which is really common on the 204s, yeah, they'll opt for the emulator because, you know, a few $100 versus a couple grand makes more sense.
And then if you chose to do it the right way and spend the couple of grand, it's going to fail again.
Yep. Actually, this one is a replacement.
Oh, wow.
From what I could tell, all of these bolts had been out. The column had been out before. This module had been replaced. And
wow.
We'd have to look it up by then to see when, but I've seen a handful of these happen exactly the same. They replace it 3 or 4 years later, it's back in lock steering column.
So let us know in the comments, what would you do? Would you spend the big bucks and say, I want it done right? And then it's going to break on you in 3 to 4 years. It's not a matter of maybe, it will. It's going to break on you again in 3 to 4 years. Or would you just pay to have the emulator done? Albeit you will lose your steering lock feature. But like he mentioned, Mercedes on most vehicles, a lot of them don't even have that feature. So while we're on the topic of Mercedes that Grimes is working on, which is at the moment quite a few of them, this one is done, and we talked about in the previous video we did on this car that we were still waiting to see what was wrong inside the transmission that was causing the no start issue. And what did you find there?
So it wasn't actually the TCM.
Okay.
Turns out it's actually the conductor plate inside the transmission, so the valve body electronics.
Right.
And that has a starter lockout contact, and it just wouldn't engage. So went through the test procedure, got the wrong values, from what it was supposed to have, both in park and in drive, and turns out that's exactly what was causing our problem. I did inspect that plug that's known for leaking. Wasn't really leaking a lot. Had a little bit in there, but nothing crazy. It's just a conductor plate failure.
Do you think that was caused by this accident up front, or was it just kind of coincidence?
It could be coincidence, but there is also the potential, since the radiator was damaged, if any coolant got into the transmission, that it could have damaged the electronics in there.
Right. We did check the fluid. We didn't really see a whole lot of contamination just by checking it real quick. So luckily, we don't think that's a major issue. But with the conductor plate being replaced, this car will start and drive. And you saw in the previous video that the engine started up and ran just fine. We can't replace those parts right now because we can't run the engine long enough to do a fluid change. Also, the cooler lines and stuff have been broken. So we really can't do anything with it right now. It needs to go to a body shop and have all these issues solved, and then we can move on from there. But now we know that it is fixable and the car can run and start and drive again. You also recently seen a video on this Maroon 500 SL, and as you can see, Grimes has been diving deep. You guys in the comments said, well, I bet it's this, I bet it's that. And it was actually none of those things. It was what we found in the engine bay of a creature that was living there. What did you find there?
So right there in the cowl, we found a rat's nest. Had to vacuum all of that. Also had to evict one of the tenants who had since passed.
Right.
And yeah, it's quite a rabbit hole digging down and finding out if or what wires have been damaged.
Right.
As far as the roll bar, I think we got down to it that it's actually the roll bar ECU, and that's what's causing it. So roll bar works, it just, in the event of a crash or a tip, it won't actually deploy.
Right, so that'll have to be sent off to be repaired.
Yep.
We're kind of getting an estimate together for the customer to give an idea what's wrong. We figured out the fuel pump is leaking. You guys saw that. The power steering pump in a line up there has a leak. We've kind of figured out what's going on with the roll bar. But with the ABS and the ASR light being on, we did replace the brake switch, and it didn't fix anything. It didn't really help anything. We found a mouse nest like he mentioned, and there's been mice all through this car. Where did they chew wires? Where didn't they chew wires? This is one of those situations where there's no book time really. There's no labor time and say, oh, it should take you 30 minutes to do this job. This is one of those situations we're going to call the customer. It's hour by hour by hour. We're going to have to pull harnesses. We're going to have to pull panels. There's who knows where the mice have all been. All it takes is one little chewed wire somewhere in the car, and then it can be loss of communications or signals or powers or grounds, and all these lights come on. It could cause a fire as well. I've actually seen some issues like that in the past where they chew a wire, the wire falls and touches somewhere it shouldn't, and can actually melt the wiring. So we're kind of at a standstill on this one. We have 90% of it figured out. We'll have to see if the customer wants to pay the diagnosis hour by hour to dive into the brake light, the warning lights on the dash. If they don't want to do it, then we just stop with that particular issue and fix the rest of the car. But you've been in Mercedes heaven basically lately, huh?
I don't know if I'd call it heaven quite yet.
Yeah, there's several other cars that have been in and out already, GLE, and also
a pair of them actually.
A pair of GLEs he's working on. Those will be some videos coming up, but he's literally swimming in Mercedes Benzes right now. Lots of cool links in the description below you can check out. Make sure to hit the subscribe button here. We got many more cool videos to come, and I'll let you get back to living in Mercedes heaven or hell or whatever it is.
We'll call it land.
But anyways, good work.
Mercedes purgatory.